I'm coming to you live from just outside of Washington, D.C. So far, Antifa forces have taken over 4 northeastern American cities: New York City, Boston, Philadelphia, and Baltimore. Widespread public executions of prominent American capitalists have taken place in front of the Statue of Liberty. Early reports show over 126,000 Americans have been killed, and arson has decimated Wall Street and the financial district. Washington, D.C. is surrounded by Antifa forces, and General Soros is giving the Trump regime 12 hours to vacate the nation's capital. These are dark times in America.
I am reloading!
Hey, poor! Hey, poor! Hey, poor! You don't have to be poor anymore! Jesus is here!
Quite an experience to live in fear, isn't it? That's what it is to be a slave.
Man, you are one twisted fuck. Nope. I'm just an ordinary guy with nothing to lose.
Greetings, fellow worker slaves, podcasting at 128 kilobits from the Fortress of Squalitude. This is the Atheist in the Trailer Park podcast. I'm your host, Tucker. Professor Fuzznuts is curled up asleep on the couch, and Buttons is curled up asleep on the floor. Yes, it's a podcast hosted by a guy and his cats. Get over it. This is a news show episode where I cover stories in the news that are related to things like atheism, secularism, science, or I find just plain interesting. In the wake of yesterday morning's mass murder at a Texas church, I debated about going with that opening and then said, fuck it. After all, nobody's going to do anything about the ready access people have to guns in this country. If the shooter had been brown instead of white, then we'd either see calls for stricter controls on immigration or people not saying much at all, if he'd been born in the U.S. In this instance, we've got a white guy slaughtering nearly 30 people in a church for reasons which haven't become clear as of yet. According to the Boston Globe, there's been 309 days in this year and 307 mass shootings. This clearly indicates that there's a problem with this country, but we all know that nothing's going to get done about it. Other than to hear politicians say, our thoughts and prayers are with the victims. This is despite the fact that the shooting took place in a church, which religious people would claim that a church is the most sacred spot. So you'd think that a mass shooting there would be enough to motivate people to do something about these kinds of things. But we know from experience that this is wrong. We also know that you can shoot a bunch of politicians or kids and the gun laws won't change. Maybe if somebody mows down a bunch of Wall Street types, we'll see some changes. That is, after all, the only significant group in this country who haven't been victims of a mass shooting. So far. Perhaps if the wealthy are targets, we'll see some changes. But I kind of doubt it. Okay. Enough of that. It's the first of the month, so I want to be sure to thank the Patreon supporters for their help. There's little more than a baker's dozen of you, but with all that's been happening and the holidays coming up, you folks have really helped me keep a roof over my head. Buttons is back to her usual self, and if it weren't for the slightly bald patches from her surgery, you'd never know that there was anything different about her. I can't even find her incision anymore. As for my job, well, I'm off this week while they do upgrades, which sucks. But I did manage to get 5.5 hours of overtime last week, so that'll make not getting paid for this week slightly more bearable. They seem to like me, which is good. I also managed to score about 30 pounds, that's roughly 15 kilos to those of you in the civilized parts of the world, of beef tenderloin for free. We only process a few different kinds of meat at our facility, and when it comes in, it's already cut up. So we normally handle beef brisket, pork butts, and boneless chicken. For whatever reason, if we get a case of something else in by mistake, we can't ship it back. So, instead of throwing it out, they give it to the employees. We had a case of beef tenderloin show up last week, and they gave me a bag of it. I took it over to a friend's house to make them dinner with it, since there's not really any way I can eat all of it by myself. opened the bag up and found that there were 5 tenderloins in it. We cooked one and only managed to eat about half of it. So I've got that in my fridge and the others are in my freezer. Hopefully I'll remember to eat them before they all go bad. I would have let my friend have some of it, but she gets queasy at the sight of raw meat. Now, to the downsides of the job. The first is that there's only 2 other people in my department on my shift. Both of them are nice, but it doesn't give me a lot of social interaction. Additionally, one of them is going to be leaving the department after the first of the year, and I have no idea who her replacement will be. It also means that I don't have a lot of time to get up to speed on the aspects of the job. Another downside is one of the guys on second shift, whom I have to work with fairly regularly, even if it is just for short periods of time. He's a nearly 60-year-old man who's basically little more than distilled hate in human form. He also tends to spray spittle when he talks, and he has one of those cotton-mouth southern accents which makes me want to tell him to take his sister's titty out of his mouth before he speaks. Without a car, however, this is probably the best paying job I can get right now. If things go well, then I should be able to get a car by June or July of next year, as well as take care of some things around the house that I've been neglecting for a long time because I just didn't have the money. Okay, let's get to the news, shall we?
Everybody needs something to believe in, don't they, Reverend?
Bow down thine ear, O Lord, and hear me, for I am poor and needy. Preserve my soul, for I am holy. O thou, my God, save thy servant that trusteth in thee. Save him from this big-mouthed coos with a motor-driven ass who... Forgive me, Lord. I speak not in vain, but this little bitch provokes me so.
Oh, Jesus. At least I can stay in character.
From TheGuardian.com, Pope Francis admits, "When I pray, sometimes I fall asleep." Man, that's bad when you find yourself boring. Pope Francis has confessed he sometimes nods off while praying and claims that saints, too, have been known to grab some holy shut-eye. "When I pray, sometimes I fall asleep," he said in an episode of a Catholic TV 2000 television program published Tuesday on YouTube. "St. Therese did it too," he said in reference to a 19th century nun, adding that Christians were called to feel like children lying in their father's arms, a place conducive to napping, he implies. Come on, Frankie, be honest. You're old, tired, and don't believe in the bullshit, but you've got to make excuses for why you nap.
Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes?
Asps. Very dangerous. You go first.
From internationalbusinesstimes.co.uk, this fascinating pre-Incan society high up in the Andes lacked social hierarchies. New evidence uncovered by archaeologists has shown a light on a pre-Incan society high up in the Andes, which did not have hierarchical social structures as is common today and was instead built on power sharing and decentralized networks. The settlement, known as Borgata, was built at some point in the 10th century in what is now Argentina, growing to perhaps a few thousand people. It was abandoned in the mid-1400s when the Incas took control of the area. Archaeologist Elizabeth Demarais from the University of Cambridge and her team have been studying the ruins. Because of the size of the site, she expected to find evidence of leaders and elites as well as poorer citizens. However, there was little evidence of social differentiation in the artifacts that were uncovered. We thought we'd see socio-economic differences reflected in diet through remains of animal bones or in dwelling locations or in material accumulation, she told Research Horizons. They described the society as being a heterarchy rather than a hierarchy. There's not a lot of details on the society in the article. It would be interesting to see how they compared technologically with other societies in the area. Were they more advanced, less advanced, or about the same? There's no indication that there were even specialized trade people. Being absorbed by the Incas doesn't mean that their way of life was somehow inferior to other societies. If there's only a few thousand of you, and possibly hundreds of thousands or millions of people nearby who don't share your way of life, you're probably going to get absorbed by that larger society no matter what you do. And I don't know if this would fit the classical definition of communism or not. The article just doesn't say enough on the subject for me to know this. Still, it would be really interesting to see, to learn a lot about the society, see how successful they were, and see if maybe we couldn't adapt it, their lifestyle to our society. I know, I'm dreaming. From Gizmodo.com. Stunned scientist detects suspected hidden chamber within Great Pyramid of Giza. Though they were constructed nearly 5,000 years ago, the Great Pyramids of Egypt are still packed with secrets. Using a technique that leverages the power of cosmic rays, scientists have confirmed the presence of a large empty space within Khufu's pyramid, a void that's signaling the presence of a possible hidden chamber. It's tempting to think that all the great archaeological discoveries from ancient Egypt have already been made, but new research published today in Nature shows there's still plenty for us to uncover. An investigation into the internal structure of Khufu's pyramid, the largest pyramid in Giza, has revealed the presence of a large and inaccessible void within the structure. The researchers who led the study, Mehdi Tayoubi from the HIP Institute in France and Kunihiro Morishima from Nagoya University. I used to have a pen pal from Nagoya. In Japan, won't go so far as to say the cavity is a hidden chamber, but they're reasonably convinced the internal feature is a deliberate architectural feature of the pyramid. Boy, that's some crappy writing there. Need a copy editor, guys. As to what's inside is anyone's guess, but the presence of artifacts and funeral items are not out of the question, according to Egyptologists. How they did it was they had 3 different teams in 3 different spots in and around the pyramid set up muon detectors. Muons can pass harmlessly through most anything and are created by cosmic rays hitting the Earth's atmosphere. This allowed the researchers to take basically a fuzzy X-ray of the inside of the pyramid, which revealed this open space. The techniques they used aren't sensitive enough for them to develop an accurate image of the open space. They know where it is, roughly how big it is, but that's about it. They plan on using more detectors for a longer period of time to get a better idea of the size and shape of the open space, as well as to see if they can find a way into the area. When, how, and if they're ever able to enter the chamber will depend upon the Egyptian government. The researchers are also developing robots to send into the chamber in case it turns out that their only way in is through a hole that they drill. What I love about this story is that not only does it show we still have a lot to learn about the pyramids, but also how unrelated scientific fields can lead to discoveries in one another. It took work in particle physics, cosmology, and electronics, to name but 3, to make this happen. At the dawn of those fields, which go back to the 19th century or before, none of the people working in them could have imagined something like this happening because of their work, I'm sure. And from Newsweek.com, we have ancient Egyptian and biblical texts reveal oldest known solar eclipse. Using rare ancient Egyptian carvings and passages from the Old Testament book of Joshua, academics have revealed the date of the earliest ever recorded solar eclipse, establishing an exact chronology of when pharaohs ruled. By cross-referencing the 2 texts, academics from the United Kingdom's University of Cambridge have ascertained that the solar eclipse mentioned in the Bible occurred the afternoon of October 30th, 1207 BCE. The study, published in the astronomical journal Astronomy and Geophysics, explains how experts went back to the original Hebrew text of the Christian and Jewish Holy Book to shed light on a passage that had baffled scholars for centuries. The verses in question concern the passage in which Joshua leads the Israelites into Canaan. Sun, stand still at Gibeon, and moon in the valley of Ajalon. And the sun stood still and the moon stopped, the text reads. The meaning had been lost in English renderings, but recent translations by Professor Sir Colin Humphreys suggest they reference an eclipse. Going back to the original Hebrew text, we determined that an alternative meaning could be that the sun and moon just stopped doing what they normally do. They stopped shining. In this context, the Hebrew words could be referring to a solar eclipse, Humphreys explained. By reading the hieroglyphs carved in the great Mernetef, I can't pronounce it, stele, an Egyptian text dating from the reigns of Pharaohs Mernetef and his sons Ramses the Great, historians were able to date the Israelites' presence in Canaan to between 1500 BCE and 1050 BCE. The breakthrough in comparing the two texts was made by backdating not only total solar eclipses using astronomical patterns, but also annual eclipses in which the sun does not completely cover the moon but creates a distinctive ring of fire, which is not how an annular eclipse... Oh, God, this thing is so fucked up. It's an annular eclipse, not an annual eclipse, and it's not the sun covering the moon, it's the moon covering the sun. Anyways, the annular eclipses are the ones that you see a big corona around the sun. We had a total eclipse here in the U.S. this past August. We will be getting an annular eclipse in the U.S. in 2019 or 2018. I forget which. Or maybe it's 2020. Anyways, it's coming up in a couple of years. From the calculations, which took into account the fluctuations in Earth orbit and rotation, Humphreys and his team posited that the only annular eclipse that could have taken place while the Israelites were in Canaan occurred in 1207 BCE. Now, the first thing I thought of when I read this was that they were wrong about it being the oldest eclipse on record. Reason being, I remembered reading about scientists dating an eclipse described in Homer's The Odyssey. I looked that up, and it turns out that the eclipse in the Odyssey most likely would have occurred in 1178 BCE, so about 30 years after the one described in Joshua. However, the one mentioned in the Odyssey is thought to have been a total eclipse, while the one in Joshua is an annular. So the Odyssey still wins for the oldest total eclipse. If both tales are describing an eclipse, how that is. There's actually a couple of different ways one could interpret the text. Now, interestingly, both the Odyssey and the Book of Joshua are thought to have been composed sometime around 700 BCE, and the events which they describe are both supposed to have taken place around the same time. I will note that there is far more archaeological evidence to support the events in the Odyssey as having been inspired by real events than there is for the Book of Joshua. In fact, while many of the cities described in the Odyssey have been found, along with places that seem to be Agamemnon's palace, the evidence for Joshua has largely revealed that the cities described in it didn't exist or were tiny villages. So if one were going to use archaeological evidence to prove a religion, I'd say that the odds were more in the Greeks' favor than the Jews. And a recent article for the Israeli paper Haaretz just rips into the idea that there's archaeological evidence to support the stories in the Bible. I'll have a link to that in the show notes rather than read from it. But the overwhelming amount of discoveries made in the region all contradict the biblical accounts in a multitude of ways. One example is that during the time the Jews were said to have fled from Egypt to Israel, Egypt controlled the territory of Israel. So the Jews wouldn't have fled their Egyptian masters. They would have merely moved from one part of the Egyptian empire to another part. Sort of like if folks decided to flee Texas for Oklahoma and claiming that once they got to Oklahoma, they no longer lived in the U.S.
Ah, Kirk, my old friend. Do you know the Klingon proverb that tells us revenge is a dish that is best served cold? It is very cold in space.
From phys.org, aliens may be more like us than we think. Hollywood films and science fiction literature fuel the belief that aliens are otherworldly, monster-like beings who are very different to humans. But new research suggests that we could have more in common with our extraterrestrial neighbors than initially thought. In a new study published in the International Journal of Astrobiology, scientists from the University of Oxford show for the first time how evolutionary theory can be used to support alien predictions and better understand their behavior. They show that aliens are potentially shaped by the same processes and mechanisms that shaped humans, such as natural selection. The theory supports the argument that foreign life forms undergo natural selection and are, like us, evolving to be fitter and stronger over time. Sam Levin, a researcher in Oxford's Department of Zoology, said, "A fundamental task for astrobiologists, those who study life in the cosmos, is thinking about what extraterrestrial life might be like. But making predictions about aliens is hard. We have only one example of life on Earth, to extrapolate from. Past approaches in the field of astrobiology have been largely mechanistic, taking what we see on Earth and what we know about chemistry, geology, and physics to make predictions about aliens." Now, the authors of the study aren't claiming that aliens will look like us or your typical bumpy-headed alien in Star Trek, but they're saying that some of the fundamental characteristics of earthly life will be similar to that which could be found in aliens. For example, they probably would have a digestive system which relied on something like gut bacteria to help digest their food, just as lots of creatures on Earth do. Obviously, they can't answer if aliens would have DNA or what amino acids might make up alien DNA, or even what aliens might look like. But they do say that based on how evolution works, we should be able to make some guesses about the general characteristics of aliens. And this is really something that I would have thought would have been obvious, but apparently not. I don't understand what the, why it took so long for somebody to look at the issue from this angle, but I'm glad people are doing it. From Gizmodo.com, an elaborate planetary system may exist around our nearest star. New observations show that there's at least one, but possibly 3 rings of cold dust around our nearest star, Proxima Centauri. That could indicate the presence of more planets, according to new research. It would be incredible if astronomers could just look at the sky with infinite resolution telescopes and see precisely what's going on. But they can't, even for the closest stars. Instead, they have to take observation from lots of different instruments and lots of different wavelengths of light to piece together an entire picture. After new observations of Proxima Centauri with the Atacama Large Millimeter Submillimeter Array Radio Telescope in Chile, there are hints that the story is much richer than last year's already incredible Proxima announcement of a nearby exoplanet in a habitable zone. This cold dust is telling us there could be a planetary system with asteroid belts. Guillaume Anglada Esqueride, one of the paper's authors from Queen Mary University of London, told Gizmodo, "There's a very rich history and lots of things to discover." Now, the problem is that they only had the use of the telescope to look at the star for a short period of time, so they're not entirely certain that what they've detected was dust rings. It might have simply been some kind of quirky behavior on the part of the star which caused the readings. They're going to try to do longer observations of this star to see if these in fact are dust rings. Longer observations will also tell them if there are more planets orbiting the star. We're already certain that there's at least one planet circling the star, and it appears to be capable of supporting life. Things like an asteroid belt or multiple asteroid belts could mean that things are pretty iffy for life on that planet. I mean, it's pretty hard for you to evolve if you're getting asteroids dropped on you every couple of centuries. Hopefully, when the James Webb Telescope goes online in 2019, it'll be able to give us better answers. If you remember Tabby's star and its weird behavior of dimming in an odd fashion, astronomers now think that this might be caused by an irregularly shaped dust cloud surrounding the star. So it's possible that we are on the cusp of a greater understanding of the universe, and I just hope we don't fuck things up before we have a chance to find out what these things might be.
But you blinded me with silence. She blinded me with silence.
From digitaljournal.com. Breakthrough in nuclear fusion produced by melting quarks. Imagine discovering a new kind of fusion reaction so powerful that physicists nearly decided to bury it rather than let the world know because they feared it could be used as a planet-killer bomb. Researchers at Tel Aviv University and the University of Chicago have shown that a huge amount of energy, with a reaction potential to release 8 times as much energy as the individual fusion reactions in an H-bomb, can be produced by melting elementary particles called quarks. The research was carried out by Tel Aviv University physics professor Marek Karliner in cooperation with Professor Jonathan L. Rosner of the University of Chicago. In their research, they discovered the massive energy potential of a particle known as a bottom quark, one of 6 different types of quark. When 2 are fused together, they form a larger subatomic particle, another particle called a nucleon, and one major eruption of energy. The article goes on to explain that the reason there's no danger this could ever be used for a weapon, and probably not for generating energy, is due to the short life of the particles involved. They're only around for about a picosecond, which is 1/1,000,000th of a second, or about as long as I last during sex. Another reason why this probably couldn't be used for a bomb is that there's no easy way to produce quarks. With a fission bomb, you just implode some uranium and the stuff goes boom. For a fusion bomb, aka a hydrogen bomb, you set off a fission bomb inside a bunch of plutonium and you wind up with a fusion reaction, which gives you a much bigger bomb. To produce quarks, you generally need something like a particle accelerator. Those tend to be rather large and use vast amounts of electricity. It's kind of hard to miniaturize one of those into something which can be stuffed into the tip of a missile. I will note, however, that a considerable amount of research which led to the development of nuclear weapons started at the University of Chicago before World War II. It'll be interesting to see if there's any future developments in this research. Can you imagine if this led to us developing fusion power plants? It'd be kind of funny if we couldn't get helium-hydrogen fusion to work, like we've been trying to do for the past 60 years, and instead use quark fusion to generate our energy. Oh, and if we managed to do this, there would be almost no nuclear waste produced by such a reactor.
I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Democracy simply doesn't work.
Okay, by now, you've all heard about the arrests in the Russia investigation and Donna Brazil's comments about the DNC primaries. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time rehashing that. I do want to point out that in the case of the Russia investigation, we really only have the broadest of ideas of what Mueller's doing. We know that he kept the arrest of Papadopoulos a secret for a couple of months. We don't know if Papadopoulos was wearing a wire during that time or who he might have spoken to. We don't know who else might have already been arrested. We do know that this looks pretty damaging for people in Trump's administration. From what I can tell, and what legal experts have said on various podcasts that I listen to, Mueller is being very meticulous in his operation. He seems to be building as airtight of a case as he can, as well as taking steps to ensure that the people who are charged can't later on be pardoned by Trump. I'm not going to start getting excited until the first guilty verdicts are announced or people particularly close to Trump get arrested. For example, I'm not sure I buy the rumors that Mueller has flipped Flynn and his son. I hope he has, but until something official happens, I'm just putting those rumors in the possible bullshit box. Hysterically, there's a disturbingly large group of people who are utterly convinced that the 4 indictments, which are still sealed, name Hillary, Obama, and the Podesta brothers for the Uranium One deal. They're so confident in their beliefs that they think the indictments will be unsealed this week and that the arrests will be made at the same time. Now, how do you think that this could happen when Mueller himself was involved with the Uranium One deal is beyond me. But considering all these people believe the whole Pizzagate nonsense, I think that it's safe to say that critical thinking isn't their strong point. As for Donna Brazil's comments, I'm going to skip the whole "did she say the primaries were rigged or not" business, as that's not really the largest issue here. The largest issue is her claim that the DNC was heavily in debt. According to her, this was caused by Obama not wanting to fundraise for the party. And if this is true, and I haven't seen any articles attacking that claim of hers, then that's a huge organizational failure on Obama's part. I don't know if he didn't do it because he doesn't like to fundraise, as some claim, or because he was ignorant of the party's finances, or what. But considering his successes as president, the party's coffers should have been overflowing with money. It seems they weren't. One of the lessons which Obama had to have learned as president is that if you don't have support in Congress, the number of things that you can do is limited. It should have been a priority of the party to have ample money to throw at congressional races, if not state and local races. Think of how much harder it would be for Congress and Trump to undo Obama's legacy if Congress had even just a narrow Democratic majority, or if more state houses and governorships were in the hands of Democrats. You'd have more states suing the federal government over its actions, as well as the government doing few things to dismantle Obama's work. And apparently, the DNC is still suffering from a lack of funds. One of the things that they've said at past meetings of the local Democratic Party is that the National Party was going to be helping to fund state and local campaigns. Well, now it's time for them to start doing that, and there doesn't seem to be very much money available. The local head is now saying that he's not certain how much money is going to be available and how much support they're going to be able to give. Even worse, they've done things which undermine efforts to actually raise money. We were supposed to have a fundraiser featuring Emmylou Harris. Had it sold out, it would have raised nearly $70,000 for local campaigns. It all fell apart due to poor planning by the locals or due to a lack of support from the state party. It's probably a combination of both. What I know happened is that shortly after the fundraiser was announced, the local party asked the state party for support to help cover some of the costs. The head of the state party replied that they hadn't budgeted for such a thing. This doesn't mean that they wouldn't be willing to help out, just that they had no money in the budget specifically set aside for such things. Rather than trying to find out if there was a way the state party could contribute, or perhaps talking to the national party, the head of the local party just canceled the event, which means that they're going to have a hell of a time raising money next year for the elections, which will be happening then. and 2018 is the first chance we have to really blunt Trump's power. Hell, if we got lucky and managed to get a Congress which had a Democratic majority, we might be able to impeach the son of a bitch and get him removed from office. And I don't have a link for this, so I can't put it in the show notes, but Mitch McConnell was saying that Congress was going to be working overtime to appoint judges that had been nominated by Trump. This is really unusual, and he made the announcement shortly after the first arrests in the Mueller investigation were announced. Almost as if they were in a panic to try and get these people installed in office before everything comes crashing down around their ears. And worse than the stuff I've talked about, there's some clear issues with members of the county executive committee, which make it unlikely that they'll be able to come up with the nearly $70,000 they could have gotten from the fundraiser with Emmylou Harris. Hell, I don't know if they can manage to come up with $10,000. I do know that we're soon going to be in the fight of our lives if we don't slam the brakes on this administration. I am trying to do what I can, but, I'm limited. And there's not another meeting until later on this month, I think. They may cancel it because it would fall the Saturday after Thanksgiving if they did it when they normally did it. I'll just have to see. Okay, enough about that. Let me hit some political news you may not have heard of. From TheGuardian.com, Russia funded Facebook and Twitter investments through Kushner Associate. Two Russian state institutions with close ties to Vladimir Putin, which means he gets money from those institutions, funded substantial investments in Twitter and Facebook through a business associate of Jared Kushner, leaked documents reveal. The investments were made through a Russian technology magnate, Yuri Milner, who also holds a stake in a company co-owned by Kushner, Donald Trump's son-in-law and senior White House advisor. The discovery is likely to stir concerns over Russian influence in U.S. politics and the role played by social media in last year's presidential election. It may also raise new questions for the social media companies and for Kushner. By the way, this is one of the companies that Kushner forgot to disclose to the government when he became part of Trump's administration. In the wake of the election mess and the testimony of Facebook's lawyer before Congress, this looks really fucking bad. And if you haven't seen Al Franken grilling the lawyer from Facebook, it's worth a watch. Franken straight up asked the guy why Facebook couldn't figure out that ads related to the 2016 election paid for in rubles might be trying to influence the election. The guy fumbles around and does everything he possibly can to avoid saying, "Hey, money's money. They were offering it, so we took it. That's how we do things in America." Franken then asked the guy if they'll refuse to accept political ads related to U.S. elections if they're paid for in rubles. And the guy won't say, "Yes, we'll refuse." He stumbles around and says that this is something they're going to be looking at in the future, but never comes out and says that they'll refuse the money. Now, to be fair to the lawyer, this is a bit of a gotcha question because the Russians can easily funnel the money through a shell company and have it converted to US dollars before paying Facebook. But you'd think that a lawyer for one of the richest companies in the world would be smart enough to recognize a setup when he saw one and be able to give a better answer than what he did. Lenin supposedly said that the Soviet Union would sell the West the rope by which we hung ourselves. It's beginning to look like he was right. On a related note, also from The Guardian, we have this. Trump's Commerce Secretary's business links with Putin family laid out in leaks files. Donald Trump's Commerce Secretary, Wilbur Ross, is doing business with Vladimir Putin's son-in-law through a shipping venture in Russia. Leaked documents and public filings show Ross holds a stake in a shipping company, Navigator, through a chain of offshore investments. Navigator operates a lucrative partnership with Sibur, a Russian gas company part owned by Kirill Shamalov, the husband of Putin's daughter, Katerina Tikhonova. I guess that's how you pronounce her name. I wonder if that's the one that Ivanka went on vacation with. Ross, a billionaire and close friend of Trump, retained holdings in Navigator after taking office this year. The relationship means he stands to benefit from the operations of a Russian company run by Putin's family and close allies, some of whom are under U.S. sanctions. And if you're not listening to the Stay Tuned with Preet podcast, which is hosted by Preet Bharara, he is the former U.S. attorney for the District of New York that Trump fired, who was investigating people close to Trump. It all sounds suspicious. Anyways, there's, obviously this guy's a pretty smart dude to have had the position that he did, but his podcast he's been covering lately all the shit with Manafort and the Mueller investigation and charges. And the October 25th episode, he has a guy on there named Bill Browder. Browder is the guy that the that the State Department killed his visa. He's also the guy who was responsible for getting the Magnitsky Act passed in Congress. What's the Magnitsky Act? Well, that's the one that put targeted sanctions on Putin and his cronies in Russia. And Magnitsky was an investigator an investigative reporter in Russia who was exposing Putin's corruption and was murdered in a Russian prison by Putin's cronies. That interview, they go into great detail about Putin's business operations and the kind of corruption you find in Russia. Really great episode. You ought to listen to it because it puts a backstory to the people that we're dealing with. And, the tangled web of Russian finances that all leads to Putin. Okay. Now, back to the article. Corporate records show Navigator ramped up its relationship with Sibur from 2014 as the U.S. and EU imposed sanctions on Russians. The measures followed Putin's aggression in eastern Ukraine and annexation of Crimea. Navigator has collected $68 million in revenue from its Sibur partnership since 2014. Now, how we know this is because of a shit ton of documents were just leaked and have been termed the Paradise Papers. These are like the Panama Papers in that they detail secret offshore tax evasion schemes many of the world's wealthiest people and corporations have been using. And I want to point out that some of Ross's involvement with Russian companies was not disclosed on his filings with the government when he became Commerce Secretary. Oops. Now, these Paradise Papers are like the Panama Papers in that they detail secret offshore tax evasion schemes many of the world's wealthiest people and corporations have been using. Even the fucking Queen of England has turned up in the Paradise Papers as having offshore accounts. Oops. How many people who've been in the Trump administration have close ties to the Russians? I think it's up to at least 9. When Obama was running back in 2008, the Republicans threw a shit fit because some 60s radical stopped by his house when he was a kid. And in 2012, they were saying that he didn't recognize the threat Russia posed to the world. Yet we've got large numbers of people in this administration who have very close ties to the Russians and Russian companies, but the Republicans don't see this as a problem. And my hat's off to the reporters who are handling the release of the Paradise Papers. Last month, one of the reporters involved in the release of the Panama Papers was killed by a car bomb likely set by someone she exposed. These folks are putting their lives on the line to get this story out there. We need more reporters like that. For more of American political insanity, we now turn to this piece from nbcnews.com. Energy Secretary Rick Perry says fossil fuels can prevent sexual assault. Perry described his belief at an energy policy event in Washington, hosted by Axios and NBC News, while talking about how bringing power to African villages would save lives.
But also from the standpoint of sexual assault, when the lights are on, when you have light that shines, the righteousness, if you will, on those types of acts, Perry said. So from the standpoint of how you really affect people's lives, fossil fuels is going to play a role in that. I happen to think it's going to play a positive role.
The ignorance of this statement is just staggering. First of all, it's cheaper and easier to use things like renewables in places like Africa than it is to build fossil fuel plants and run power lines all over the place. Secondly, Hollywood's a pretty brightly lit place, and we see how well those lights did at stopping sexual assault. Next, from Gizmodo.com. Georgia Attorney General won't defend election officials in lawsuit over wiped electoral server. In July, a lawsuit alleged that computer systems in Georgia containing the personal information of 6.7 million voters, as well as election officials' passwords, were riddled with security vulnerabilities, and that authorities responsible for the databases failed to fix them within 6 months of being notified. 3 days later, Georgia officials conveniently wiped the state's election data, potentially preventing any investigation whether the server was indeed meddled with. As Slate noted, the incident could only be explained as either an incredible act of incompetence or a deliberate attempt to cover the issue up at the same time Republican Secretary of State Brian Kemp, Georgia's top election official, runs for governor. Another curious development on the case on Wednesday, according to the Associated Press, the Georgia Attorney General's office has declined to defend Kemp in the suit. Instead, Kemp and other election officials will be represented by a private firm, the AP wrote. Now, the question is, why won't the Attorney General defend them? That's usually the case in things like this. The state handles the defense because the people are acting in their official capacity. If the Attorney General doesn't handle the case, then it's either because they think there's some kind of wrongdoing, or the individuals have chosen to be represented by a private attorney. We don't know which it is, and probably won't have a better idea until the case comes to trial. But it bears watching. From japantimes.co.jp. Trump said Samurai Japan should have shot down overflying North Korean missiles. U.S. President Donald Trump has said Japan should have shot down the North Korean missiles that flew over the country before landing in the Pacific Ocean earlier this year, diplomatic sources have said, despite the difficulties and potential ramifications of doing so. The revelation came ahead of Trump's arrival in Japan on Sunday at the start of his 5-nation trip to Asia. Threats from North Korea's nuclear weapons and missile development programs were set to be high on the agenda in his talks with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe on Monday. Trump questioned Japan's decision not to shoot down the missiles when he met or spoke by phone with leaders from the Southeast Asian countries over recent months to discuss how to respond to the threats from North Korea, the sources said. The U.S. president said he could not understand why a country of samurai warriors did not shoot down the missiles, the sources said. I guess Trump doesn't realize that John Belushi has been dead for over 30 years now, so there's no samurai left. This is sort of like that Rick Perry story in that the level of stupidity is staggering, and it's hard to say a lot about it. Now, the reason that would be difficult to shoot down the missiles is because the only technology that we have that kind of works is the Patriot missile system. And basically that works because it catches the missiles as they're in their descent stage, coming effectively right at the Patriot missile system. And the Patriot missile system isn't exactly accurate. The Patriot missile system doesn't exactly have a great track record. In the first Persian Gulf War, they were always talking about, oh, well, these were fantastic. They shot down all these Scud missiles, and only a few Scud missiles got through. Later investigation revealed that they couldn't document that the Patriots had hit any Scud missiles at all. Now, that, of course, was almost 30 years ago, and technology has come a long way since then. But the and the Israelis have what's known as the Iron Dome, which is their version of the Patriot missile system. So it's certainly possible that Japan could have hit some of the missiles, but the question would be where they would be in their flight trajectory, that they would be in an optimum position for the missile defense systems in Japan to take them down. If, the only place they could shoot them down was actually over Japan, it's not really a good idea since you probably have debris hitting a populated area. And the tests that the U.S. government has done to hit a missile in the launch phase haven't been very promising. The launch phase, it's much harder to hit a missile because they're going really, really fucking fast. Like, by the time the shuttle cleared the launch tower, it was going almost escape velocity of the Earth. So, and I forget what that is off the top of my head, and I'm not going to look it up, but it was seriously hauling ass. Any kind of missile launched from North Korea would be going at a similar rate of speed. So, and targeting systems and things like that aren't accurate enough to be able to pick off a target when it's being launched. There have been a couple of successful tests, but those have all involved the U.S. putting a transponder on the missile so that the weapon system can easily find the missile and shoot it out of the sky. It's not been like, oh shit, the missile's launching, we gotta take it out now before, it gets too far up. We can't do it. Yeah. Maybe one day we will, maybe we won't. But we can't do it now, and you would think that the guy who's, the commander-in-chief of the U.S. military would understand such things, but given that he doesn't like to read, it's kind of not surprising that he doesn't. Okay, from Philly.com, we have two popular conservative Twitter personalities were just outed as Russian trolls. I'm shocked, I say. Jenna Abrams was a popular figure in right-wing social media circles, boasting nearly 70,000 followers. Abrams was featured in numerous articles during the 2016 election, spotlighted by outlets as varied as USA Today, The Washington Post, the BBC, and Yahoo Sports. Her tweet about CNN airing porn during Anthony Bourdain's show, It Didn't, was reported by numerous outlets. But Abrams never existed. According to information released by House Democrats earlier this week, Abrams was one of more than 2,750 fake Twitter accounts created by employees at the Internet Research Agency, a troll farm funded by the Russian government based in St. Petersburg. In addition to the Abrams account, several other popular conservative media personalities, Laura Bailey, South Lone Star, 10 GOP, were all revealed to be troll accounts. All have been deactivated on Twitter. And I will add that a Twitter account which was supposedly connected to the Tennessee Republican Party turned out to be a Russian troll farm bot. According to the Daily Beast, the agency developed a following around the Abrams account by offering humorous, seemingly non-political takes on pop culture figures like Kim Kardashian. The agency also furnished a fake account, which dates back to 2014, with a personal website, a Gmail account, and even a GoFundMe page. Once the Abrams account began to develop a following, the tone of its tweets shifted from pokes and prods at celebrities to divisive views on hot topics like immigration and segregation. And those divisive views were things like banning all immigrants and that the Civil War was all about money. But hey, that company Kushner runs with the Russians that's invested hundreds of millions of dollars in Twitter is no big deal, and certainly no sign that the Russians tried to influence the election. The other account that the article talks about in depth was supposedly ran by a woman named Pamela Moore. That was their Twitter handle. Both Michael Flynn and his son followed the two accounts mentioned in the article. Donald Trump Jr., Kellyanne Conway, Brad Parscale, Trump's digital campaign director, as well as Mike Pence, all followed a number of fake accounts and retweeted them. I also want to point out that Facebook had people heavily embedded in Trump's campaign, and some in Trump's campaign credit those Facebook employees as being the factor which enabled Trump to win the election. I believe it was Brad Parscale who really pushed the idea that it was the Facebook employees that helped Trump win the election, but I don't know, and I don't have time to dig that article up. Now, we also have this bit of craziness from rawstory.com. 2 Senate candidates busted using aliases are possibly married to each other, but no one can figure it out. Montanans are currently debating the motives of 2 candidates allegedly running for the United States Senate seat currently held by Democrat John Tester. James Dean says he is running for the Republican nomination. Sarah Dean says she is running for the Democratic Party nomination. The two claim to be married, but neither seem to be who they say they are. The bizarre tale was uncovered by longtime Billings Gazette reporter Tom Ludy. William James Dean, who currently refers to himself as James Dean, filed to run for president in California under a different name, Daniel Lane Dean, the name that appeared on his Air Force Academy diploma and his Hawaiian State Bar exam, and a divorce record that shows him being served dissolution papers while working for the Judge Advocate General Corps at Guantanamo Bay. That's not all. The Billings Gazette also uncovered that Sarah Dean has used no fewer than 4 names, each affiliated with an online business or a Christian ministry, a collection of children's books, or a crowd-funded charity. The Gazette reporter traveled 250 miles to Harve, Montana to interview the couple, and yet they couldn't confirm that they were married, nor were they able to give a wedding date or location. The paper has been able to pin down the real identities of the couple or what their motives might be. But what a fucked up election system we have when people can run for office using fake names. This has to be a quirk in Montana law. I know in Tennessee you have to use your legal name, and it's your legal name which appears on the ballot. There's a very famous case where a Tennessee politician changed his name in an effort to get votes. He became Byron Low Tax Looper so that he would appear on the ballot with that name. Worried that this still wouldn't be enough to win the election, Looper then proceeded to murder his opponent. This was about 2 weeks before the election. He was identified and arrested a few days after the murder. His opponent's widow managed to win the election as a write-in candidate. Now, so I don't leave you feeling all depressed. Our last piece also comes from Raw Story. Milo Yiannopoulos fired by conservative website The Daily Caller after one column. Alt-right provocateur Milo Yiannopoulos was fired by the conservative website The Daily Caller after publishing a single column on the site's opinion page, said The Hill on Saturday. The Hill also confirmed on Saturday evening that The Daily Caller had fired opinion editor Rob Mariani for his role in bringing the embattled Yiannopoulos on board. Yiannopoulos announced on his Facebook page Saturday he is banned for life from Twitter for his role in racist harassment campaigns and other trolling, that he was fired from a position at the Daily Caller as a weekly columnist. Sad news. The Daily Caller has caved to pressure and canceled my weekly column after a day, claiming falsely they never planned to run weekly contributions from me, wrote Yiannopoulos. Really? There's only one thing to say about this, and I'm not the one to say it. So, here it is. Okay. I apologize for this episode being a little late. It is still out on Monday, although normally I have these things posted by this time, but buttons and fuzz nuts really make it hard for me to do these episodes. Seems like every time I sit down at the computer that both of them are on me, headbutting me for attention, and playing with them and distracting them doesn't solve the problem and get me some peace. So, anyways, next episode will be, I believe, the last of the Apocrypha, and I may, depending on how things go, have a guest for that episode. Just have to wait and see.
That's it for this episode of The Atheist in the Trailer Park Podcast. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, as well as just about anywhere else podcasts can be found. Many of the episodes are also on YouTube. Follow the show on Twitter. @TParkAtheist is the show's Twitter handle. It's on Facebook at facebook.com/trailerparkatheist.com. If you happen to like the podcast, please rate it on iTunes. If you'd like to support the podcast, there's a donate button on the show notes page. You can support it via Patreon at patreon.com/TNTucker. Thanks for listening.
Say goodnight, Fuzz-Nuts.
All I know is this violates every canon of respectable broadcasting.
Damned cat.